Greetings ladies and gentlemen, Fuzzfinger here, and thank you for joining me today. Just recently we collected the fabled Lucid Nightmare mount in World of Warcraft after completing a series of puzzles that became available in patch 7.3. Now the final puzzle involved traversing a complicated maze which required us to move through various rooms matching coloured orbs with coloured runes. The area was known as the Endless Halls. I found this quite a frustrating experience, and as I made my way through I was often reminded of the likewise confusing Great Crystal area of Final Fantasy XII. This was another area and game I recently covered on my channel. So in this video I'm going to be comparing both of these areas and games and discussing why I think this kind of gameplay is not particularly fun for the player, where I think they go wrong these areas, and perhaps give some ideas as to how they could have been improved. So please let us know in the comments if you agree or disagree with my analyses and thoughts, and if you do enjoy watching, don't forget to support me by hitting the like button and being subscribed to the FuzzfingerGaming YouTube channel. Okay then, so before we actually look at what the problems are that I think with these kinds of areas, we must first look at what the intention is of the developers in creating this kind of gaming content. Okay, so clearly both areas exist as a means of offering another kind of challenge for the player, a kind that forces them to think outside of the box, so to speak, and to play the respective game in a way that they have not become accustomed to. And so the reason I'm comparing these two particular games and these two areas is basically that the same method is used by both when offering up this additional challenge. For example, both games remove any kind of meaningful mapping that the player would normally rely on through the rest of the game when they are faced with these specific areas, and instead the player is expected to use alternative means to orient their position correctly. And on top of this, both games also include various other structures and mechanisms to confuse things even further. Now, fortunately there are no enemy encounters in World of Warcraft's Endless Halls. However, since some people took over 5 hours to complete that area, and the puzzle it contained, the lack of enemies probably comes as little comfort to them anyway. Now, the unique mechanics of this particular area is that it is both randomly generated, making it unique for every player, but also the rooms themselves look virtually identical, and so the player often finds themselves looping around back to previously visited areas without even realising that they are then having to retrace their previous steps. Now that leads us really to an inevitable question. Is this kind of gameplay fun in either game? For example, for those who have played the classic World of Warcraft, you may remember back in the day that many internal areas did not actually include maps at all. For example, some of the cave systems didn't include maps and the player would easily get lost. So this led to some frustrating experiences, there's no doubt about that. And it's these experiences that really prompted Blizzard, the developers of World of Warcraft, to retroactively create maps for those areas and then introduce them later on in the game's life. And so it actually seems quite ironic and even strange to me that they would now purposefully create an area that is multiple times more complicated than any of those previous areas and not include any kind of map. And before anybody mentions the mini-map, please, don't bother. The only purpose that really serves in this particular area is its use as a compass, but not as a map. So going back to the Great Crystal in Final Fantasy XII, well, things were a little bit different here because this particular area has a fixed layout, unlike the Endless Halls randomly generated layout. So that means it is possible in this case for the player to use a map that is external to the game itself. Obviously the game doesn't include one, that's the point, but you can go outside of the game in order to see the map of the area. For example, a map found on the internet, or the map that was included in the official strategy guide. In fact, some of the more cynical amongst you might think this had something to do with it. You know, I'm sure most people had the internet by 2002, but I'm also willing to bet that a lot of strategy guides were sold because of the map it included for the Great Crystal. As a matter of fact, even when you do use an external map, the Great Crystal is not only not trivialised, but it's still very easy to get lost in. It still requires a lot of thought and work on behalf of the player. As a matter of fact, I don't know of anybody who's been able to complete that area without some external use of a map or a guide or a walkthrough or something to guide them through, and that includes of course getting all the optional treasures and killing the optional bosses. I'm sure there's probably some people out there that have done so, but I suspect it took many more hours than it needed to. And unfortunately, and I do hate to say this because I'm a massive fan of Final Fantasy XII, I mean the walkthrough series that I've done covers about 200 videos I think, so I'm not critical of the game really, but in this particular area I am, and effectively forcing your player to leave the game in order to proceed in the game is generally, in my opinion, a sign of poor design. No, it's fine, absolutely fine if a player wants to use a strategy guide to, you know, speed things up, make things easier, get some answers for something they're struggling with, or whatever the case may be. But when the player is effectively forced to use a guide, as in there's literally no way you can proceed without looking at some external information, then you know, that's really a sign to the developers, to the designers, that the information they're looking for should be provided by the game itself. So for the Great Crystal, which is what we're talking about of course, I do truly believe that a full area map would not have made the place too trivial. We already had, you know, an interesting gating system, which inevitably became just overly frustrating because of the no map situation, but with that map situation, that area could have been a lot more fun, it would have been a lot less annoying, and in my opinion that would have been the appropriate balance of challenge versus reward that you actually collect from that place. And so for World of Warcraft, I think a different solution would have been perhaps more appropriate, similar but slightly different. You see, the Endless Halls created this situation where the player became far too reliant, in my opinion, on RNG. Therefore, some people have claimed to have completed the area in under an hour, literally just by running around and without much thought, and yet others, even with pen and paper and some organisation, have been stuck for many hours. So in my opinion, a Diablo-style map could have worked out a lot better. In this situation, the area would be initially unmapped, but then the player can reveal the map as they go and as they travel. And a third-party add-on is currently available that does actually attempt to do something similar, but unfortunately, because that add-on does not know and cannot know when the player has looped back around, it often causes more confusion than it tries to fix. And of course it is possible that this could trivialise the area to the point where Blizzard did not intend it to be in that place, but I don't think it would. What I do think it would do is remove the unnecessary frustration that many of you guys have had to face when going through the Endless Halls. Right, so having shared my own thoughts, I would love to hear about yours. Do you believe that these kinds of areas are fun, and that the designers made good decisions, or should in-game challenges rely on something more than simply providing no map or means of orientation? You know, if you do think they're fun, would you be happy to see them in more games? Would you be happy to see more challenges, for example, like this in upcoming World of Warcraft content? Please let us know what you think in the comments, and for more Final Fantasy and World of Warcraft, stay tuned here with me, Fuzzfinger.